The story of Ada Marrow begins on a fog-laced morning in 1842, in the secluded reaches of Dover County, Georgia, where pine forests pressed against slow water and where one plantation name carried a weight so heavy it silenced anyone who heard it spoken aloud. Blackwood Rise. A place known not for the size of its cotton fields, nor for its harvest yields, but for its master, Jonas Blackwood, a man whose wealth was inherited, but whose cruelty was handcrafted. Blackwood was the kind of figure who appeared in local legends long before sundown. Children whispered about him near hearth fires, adults avoided speaking of him at all. He was tall, angular, and observant in the most unsettling way. He watched people the way a predator watched for the smallest movement before striking. His manner was polite in public, charming even, but behind the plantation gate, everyone knew the mask dropped. And into this landscape, of fear, superstition, and suffocating silence, Ada Marrow was born. She was 6 years old when she first realized she saw the world differently. While others kept their eyes down, Ada watched everything. She watched the overseer's patterns, the routes the night guards took, the arguments that broke out in the fields, and the way Jonas Blackwood always paused for half a second before lying. By 12, people whispered that Ada had a mind too sharp for this place. By 14, Blackwood noticed. And once he noticed, everything changed. He summoned Ada one evening to the main house under the guise of helping with ledger work. To the others it seemed harmless. Blackwood often trained young enslaved children to perform house tasks. But the overseer, Claiborne Price, wore a troubled expression the moment he heard the summons. He had been on the plantation long enough to know Blackwood never did anything without reason. Blackwood saw something in Ada. Not obedience. Not potential labor. He saw intelligence. And intelligence, on a place like Blackwood Rise, was more dangerous than a spark near dry hay. The first test came the very next morning. Blackwood asked Ada a question while reviewing shipment papers. "Tell me what you think these numbers mean." There was no correct answer. There was only observation. And Ada answered with precision, quiet, humble, but unmistakably accurate. Blackwood leaned back, fingers steepled, and smiled in that slow, razor-thin way of his. From that day forward, Ada Marrow was no longer just another young enslaved girl. She became Blackwood's assistant, which meant, in truth, that she became his project. And his prisoner. He asked her to read to him in the evenings, not out of kindness, but because he wanted to test the limits of her memory. He had her copy down letters, maps, legal agreements. He made her stand beside him at the ledger table for hours, tracing numbers as he instructed her in bookkeeping. Ada learned everything, faster than he could teach it. He took pride in that. And fear. Because Blackwood believed intelligence could be shaped into loyalty. But only if he controlled it completely. So he tried. He told Ada only the information he chose, but he underestimated her. She pieced together meaning from fragments, caught details from conversations he thought she didn't understand, and saw weaknesses he didn't even know he had. And Ada never forgot that knowledge was power. Even in slavery. Especially in slavery. She never forgot her mother's dying whisper either. "Your mind is your weapon. Don't let them take that too." It became Ada's anchor. It also became Blackwood's mistake. For while he believed he was molding her into a tool he could use, Ada Marrow was quietly, carefully building a plan. Not for survival, but for escape. And to escape Blackwood Rise, she would need to outsmart a man who trusted no one, and yet believed himself the smartest man in Georgia. A belief Ada would exploit for the next 12 years. Ada was 17 when she realized the first step of her plan wouldn't be to flee but to mislead. Blackwood trusted her partly but not fully. He relied on her skills but he watched her every move. He asked questions at random, often testing whether she noticed small details or overheard private conversations. He was obsessed with control. And Ada used that obsession against him. The first falsehood she fed him was tiny, almost invisible. A harmless detail about which neighboring plantations were rotating crops that season. Blackwood believed her immediately. A week later she gave him another lie, slightly larger. Then another. Over time she learned exactly what kind of information he accepted without question. He believed anything that made him feel superior. Anything that confirmed his own suspicions. Anything that flattered his ego. And so Ada's web began to spin. She manipulated his business decisions just enough to keep him unsteady but not enough to draw attention. She made him think nearby plantations were planning to undermine him. She made him believe a cotton trader in Savannah was secretly dealing with his rival. Slowly, gently, Ada pushed Jonas Blackwood into paranoia. It worked. Blackwood began ordering new patrol routes. He stationed guards in areas he'd never cared about before. He changed supply schedules and locked rooms he once left open. He became consumed by the idea that enemies surrounded him, that he alone saw the threats others ignored. And the more consumed he became, the more room Ada had to maneuver. She found ways to enter places she wasn't allowed. She learned which keys fit which locks. She memorized schedules, supply routes, shipment dates, county fair dates, militia practice days, every detail that could help her disappear when the time came. And she did all of this while playing the role of the loyal, obedient assistant. She even corrected Blackwood's mistakes before he saw them. He saw that as devotion. But it was strategy. For Ada knew that to escape Blackwood Rise she would need a distraction, a perfect moment, and a plan Blackwood would never see coming. But the greatest challenge in her path wasn't Blackwood. It was the overseer, Claiborne Price. Price was not intelligent, but he was observant in a blunt, animal way. He noticed movements, glances, whispers. He didn't understand strategy, but he sensed when something felt wrong. And Ada made him uneasy. One night in early spring, Price intercepted her on the path between the main house and the storage barn. He stepped into the moonlight with that heavy-lidded stare of his. "You don't fool me, girl," he growled. Ada froze. "You think Blackwood trusts you," he continued. "But he don't trust nobody. And I'm gonna find out what you're up to." He stepped closer. "And when I do, you'll pray I hadn't." Price walked away, boots grinding over gravel, leaving Ada shaken but more determined than ever. From that moment on, she knew her plan needed to accelerate. And fate gave her the opportunity sooner than she expected. A neighboring plantation caught fire, a massive blaze miles away but visible from Blackwood Rise. Smoke choked the horizon. Messengers arrived at once, warning of embers drifting toward nearby properties. Blackwood panicked. He mobilized guards, sent patrols to watch his property line, and ordered Price to supervise the fields all night. Chaos swirled. And in chaos, Ada thrived. She slipped away from the main house and entered a storage shed Blackwood rarely visited. Inside was a map, one she had seen only once before. It outlined every path leading out of Dover County, back roads, old trading routes, river trails. Ada copied it in silence, her hands shaking. If anyone saw her, she would be killed. But no one did. She folded the map into her dress, ran back to the main house, and resumed her tasks before Blackwood called her name. The first major piece of her escape had fallen into place. But what Ada didn't know, yet, was that the biggest obstacle she would ever face was not fire, nor Jonas Blackwood, nor Claiborne Price. It would be the betrayal she never saw coming. From someone she trusted. The betrayal came from a place she never imagined. A young enslaved boy named Samuel Tate, only 14, small for his age but bright-eyed and curious. Ada had taught Samuel to read scraps of old newspapers. She had shown him how to recognize certain routes and symbols. She saw in him the beginnings of the same spark her mother once saw in her. But Samuel adored Blackwood in a misguided, fragile way. Blackwood had once saved him from the wrath of a field overseer, purely by chance, not kindness, and to Samuel, that was enough to view him as a savior. Samuel didn't understand the dangers of sharing information, and he spoke too freely. One evening, Samuel overheard Ada speaking quietly with another enslaved woman, Rosa. Ada was giving Rosa coded warnings, avoiding certain wells, staying away from particular sheds where Blackwood stored volatile chemicals. All small acts of protection. Samuel, believing he was being helpful, repeated the conversation to Blackwood. And Blackwood, already paranoid, already tightened like a drawn bow, interpreted the innocent conversation as conspiracy. For the first time in years, Ada felt the full weight of Blackwood's suspicion turn toward her like a blade. He summoned her to the study at dusk. The room flickered with lamplight, shadows stretching across the walls. Blackwood sat rigidly at his desk, the edges of his ledgers perfectly aligned. "Tell me," he began softly, "why you've been speaking to people about my storage rooms." Ada answered with a carefully rehearsed lie. She had been asked to retrieve laundry supplies. The shed was locked. She asked Rosa if she knew where the key was. Reasonable. Harmless. Blackwood stared at her for a long, silent minute. Too long. At last he exhaled. Not in relief, but in calculation. "I see," he murmured. "I sometimes forget people speak even when they shouldn't." He dismissed her with a flick of his hand. But from that night forward, Ada felt his eyes track her every movement. She adjusted her plan, slowed her pace, became more cautious than ever before. Because Blackwood no longer viewed her as merely useful. He viewed her as possibly dangerous. And dangerous things were removed. Months passed under a suffocating tension. Ada spoke only when necessary, moved only when watched, and maintained the appearance of utter devotion. She continued feeding lies, but smaller ones, safer ones Blackwood found flattering rather than alarming. Until the day she learned of the breaking point. She found out accidentally, while copying a shipment schedule. Blackwood had written a note concerning her name. Observe closely. Loyalty uncertain. A chill ran through her. She knew then. Her window was closing. If she didn't escape soon, she never would. And then, something unexpected happened. A traveling salesman arrived at Blackwood Rise, a white man named Eli Carson, jovial, talkative, and nosy. Carson was the type who believed gossip was a form of currency. He chatted freely with everyone, including enslaved workers. He mentioned something that stopped Ada's breath cold. A new law being discussed in neighboring counties. A law allowing plantation owners to relocate troublesome, enslaved individuals to harsher labor camps deeper in the South. Blackwood had influence. Blackwood was paranoid. Blackwood was cruel. Ada knew without doubt. If that law passed, she would be among the first sent away. Her time was nearly gone. So she devised the final phase of her escape plan. A plan that would require a distraction so large the entire plantation would be thrown into disorder. A distraction so bold, so dangerous, so perfect, that only a master manipulator like Ada could conceive it. She would feed Blackwood one last lie. The biggest one yet. One he would believe without hesitation. Because it played directly into the paranoia she'd planted years before. She told him that one of the neighboring plantations planned to sabotage Blackwood Rise, to set fire to the cotton barns as revenge for a business slight. Blackwood believed her instantly. He doubled security. Shifted guards to patrol the wrong areas. Ordered Price to supervise the fields day and night. The entire plantation bristled with fear and confusion. Exactly as Ada intended. Then she stole the keys. She stole food. She stole a knife. She stole documents she had forged over 3 years, papers that could help her travel through counties unnoticed. And on a moonless night, when the guards were stationed far from the North Road, Ada ran. She didn't hesitate. Didn't look back. Every step was calculated. Every turn memorized. She made it 2 miles before she heard the horn. The one Blackwood ordered blown if an escape was detected. He knew. Price was already mounted and riding. Ada Marrow ran for her life. Price caught up with her near the riverbank. The moon broke through the clouds just as he leapt from his horse, tackling her into the mud. Ada fought with every ounce of strength she possessed, but Price outweighed her by more than 100 pounds. He pinned her arms. She gasped for air. Mud and water soaked through her dress. And he whispered in her ear, "I told you I'd find out." Ada's heart hammered like war drums. Price reached for the rope on his belt. But at that moment, Ada did something she had practiced in secret for years. She used her mind. She looked him in the eye and said, "If you take me back alive, Blackwood will think you were part of it." Price froze. Because the lie she spoke next was flawless. "He'll think you helped me. He'll think you let me slip by. He'll think you knew." Price's iron grip loosened. "You know him," Ada said softly. "He trusts no one. Not you. Not the guards. Not anyone." She watched confusion in Price's eyes shift into fear. "He'll blame you," Ada pressed. "And you know what he does to people he blames." Price staggered back, rope still in hand. Ada rolled to her feet, breathing hard. They stared at one another for a long second. Until Price whispered, "Go." He mounted his horse and rode away, not to help her, not out of kindness, but out of fear. Ada turned toward the river, crossed it chest deep, and dragged herself up the opposite bank. She pushed through forests for hours, then days, then nearly a week. Finally, half conscious, she reached a safe house on the Underground Railroad operated by a woman known only as Miss Catherine. Catherine took one look at Ada, muddy, trembling, hollowed out, and said, "You made it." Those 3 words shattered her. Ada collapsed, sobbing into Catherine's arms, the first time she'd cried since childhood. The journey north was brutal. But nothing was more brutal than the 12 years she endured under Jonas Blackwood. Ada traveled by night, used forged papers, crossed 2 states, avoided marshals, slave catchers, and paid informants. And finally, on a cold September morning in 1854, Ada Marrow stepped onto free soil for the first time in her life. Years later, newspapers published a shocking investigation of Blackwood Rise. Former enslaved workers described the manipulation, the false accusations, the psychological torment, and Ada's legendary 12-year deception. Jonas Blackwood's reputation collapsed. The plantation decayed. And Ada's name became a whisper carried across the South. The woman who beat him. The woman who outsmarted a master. The woman who walked away. But Ada wanted none of the fame. She wanted only one thing: freedom. And she earned it with brilliance sharper than any weapon an oppressor could imagine. If Ada Marrow's escape shook you, if her mind, her courage, and the terror she outran left you breathless, then imagine how many stories like hers were buried, silenced, erased by the very people who feared the truth she carried. Here on Hidden Tales we dig them back up. Every week we uncover another shadow history tried to hide. Another name. Another secret. Another life that refuses to stay forgotten. So if you want to keep traveling into the dark, if you want more stories of survival, manipulation, downfall, and justice finally catching up, then don't let this moment fade. Subscribe to Hidden Tales. Turn on the bell. Share this episode so Ada's story reaches someone who needs it. And tell me in the comments, did Ada win because she was brave? Or because Jonas Blackwood underestimated the mind he tried to break? Your voice keeps these stories alive. Your support helps this channel grow. And your curiosity is what brings the next hidden tale into the light. I'll see you in part 5. Stay curious, stay brave, and remember, the past is never as silent as it seems.